If I had known this before, if someone had pulled me aside and whispered, "Be careful, she's not who you think she is," I might have turned around and walked away. But no one did. Instead, I walked straight into the fire, blindfolded and smiling, thinking I'd found the one person who could make my life complete. It all started in the library. Of all places to meet someone who would turn my world upside down, it had to be there, surrounded by books, knowledge, and quiet whispers. I was working on my postgraduate thesis, drowning in philosophy texts and half-written notes when I looked up and saw her. Emily. She wasn't looking for books. That much was obvious. She stood near the front desk, fiddling with her phone, glancing around nervously like she didn't belong there. Her blonde hair fell in loose waves over her shoulders, and her eyes had this tired, restless look, like someone who hadn't slept well in years. I couldn't stop staring. She noticed, and when her eyes locked on mine, I felt something shift inside me. It was magnetic. She smiled, a shy, hesitant smile, and I was done for. Her sister, Claire, worked at the library and introduced us. "This is Emily," Claire said, as if it was the most casual thing in the world. But there was nothing casual about the way my heart raced when Emily shook my hand. Her skin was soft, her voice low and warm. She was nothing like the academic types I usually spent my time with. She was vibrant, unpredictable, a little chaotic, and I was hooked. We were so different that it should have been obvious from the start. Emily smoked like a chimney, drank whiskey straight from the bottle, and rode her bike like she owned the streets. I was the opposite, a bookworm who spent more time in libraries than bars, a man who preferred debates about Kant over wild nights out. But maybe that's why I fell for her. She was everything I wasn't, and I wanted to know what it felt like to live in her world. We started talking. I asked her what brought her to the library, and she laughed, a short, bitter laugh that hinted at stories she wasn't ready to tell. "Honestly, I just needed to get out of the house," she said. "My life's been complicated. I didn't want to be alone today." That confession hit me like a punch to the gut. She wasn't just beautiful, she was broken, and all I wanted was to fix her. "You don't have to be alone," I said, surprising myself. "I'm here, and I'll listen if you want to talk." She hesitated, like she was weighing whether to trust me. Finally, she shook her head. "Not today," she said softly. "But maybe someday." That was enough for me. I didn't care what her past looked like or what secrets she was holding back. I just knew I wanted to be the one who made her feel safe, the one who helped her believe in happy endings again. Looking back, I should have asked more questions. I should have paid closer attention. But I didn't. Instead, I let myself fall, hard and fast, into something I didn't understand. And by the time I realized what was really happening, it was already too late. The first few weeks were intoxicating. Emily was unpredictable, and I found myself swept up in her world of late-night bike rides, impromptu whiskey-fueled conversations, and cigarette smoke curling through the dim light of our apartment. It was chaotic and messy, but it felt alive. She filled the space with laughter, music, and stories that danced around the edges of truth without ever fully landing. And I let her. I let her keep her secrets because I didn't want to scare her off by pushing too hard. I told myself it didn't matter. I thought love was enough. But there were cracks, little things I brushed aside, like the way she'd stare off into the distance, lost in thought, and then suddenly snap back with a forced smile, or how she'd flinch when her phone buzzed and disappear to take calls in another room. One night, I asked her about it. She was sitting cross-legged on the couch, cigarette in one hand, a glass of whiskey in the other. The glow from the streetlights spilled through the window, casting shadows that made the room feel smaller. "Emily," I said carefully, "is there something you're not telling me?" Her eyes flicked to mine, and for a moment I thought she'd finally open up. But then she laughed, a hollow sound that didn't match her usual carefree energy. "You worry too much," she said, taking a sip of whiskey. "I told you my past is messy. But it's just that, the past. Don't let it ruin what we have." I wanted to believe her. I needed to believe her. So I let it go. I let her keep her secrets and told myself they didn't matter. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. I didn't want to wait. I didn't want to think. I was so caught up in her world that I proposed one night, right there in our tiny apartment. She looked at me with wide eyes, then smiled and said she was religious and believed in doing things the right way. She suggested we get married that night. Emily said she knew a priest who would marry us, no questions asked. I didn't care about the details. She was all that mattered. We drove out to a small chapel, the kind you pass without noticing, and by midnight, we were husband and wife. When I asked about the legal paperwork, she brushed it off. "We'll take care of that later," she said. "What matters is us. Right now." I should have stopped there. I should have asked more questions. But I didn't. I let her lead, and I followed blindly, never suspecting where that road would take me. Married life with Emily was a blur, fast, chaotic, and thrilling. It felt like I had stepped into a different universe, one where rules didn't apply and logic took a back seat. She brought energy into my life that I never knew I was missing. But cracks started showing almost immediately. Emily's mood swung wildly. One moment she was laughing and dancing in the kitchen, pouring drinks and pulling me into her whirlwind of excitement. The next, she was distant, staring out the window like she was waiting for someone, or something. She introduced me to her friends, and I couldn't shake the feeling that they were surprised to see me. They whispered and gave each other knowing looks. One night, after too many drinks, one of her friends leaned in and said, "You won't be around long?" When I asked what he meant, he just grunted and said, "You'll see." The comment haunted me. "You won't be around long." I tried to laugh it off, but it gnawed at me. I told myself he was drunk, just messing with me, but the seed of doubt had already been planted. Emily started coming home later and later. When I asked where she'd been, she brushed me off with excuses about errands, last-minute plans with friends, or just needing space. At first, I believed her. I wanted to believe her. But the little things added up. One night, she didn't come home at all. I stayed up pacing, calling her phone over and over until it went straight to voicemail. By morning, I was frantic. When she finally walked through the door, wearing the same clothes she'd left in, I demanded an explanation. She looked at me like I was the crazy one. "Calm down," she said, tossing her purse onto the couch. "I crashed at Claire's. My phone died. You're acting insane." "Insane? Emily, you disappeared all night. You didn't answer my calls. I thought something happened to you." She rolled her eyes. "You need to trust me. I told you it was nothing. Don't make this a bigger deal than it is." But it was a big deal. And the more I pushed, the more she pulled away. She stopped sharing things with me, and when I tried to get close, she shut down. I started feeling like a stranger in my own home. The whispers from her friends, the late nights, the evasive answers. It all started forming a pattern. I didn't want to admit it, but deep down, I knew something was wrong. One night, unable to shake the unease, I followed her. She told me she was going out with Claire, but I didn't believe her. I waited until she left, then grabbed my jacket and slipped out after her. She didn't go to Claire's. Instead, she walked into a bar on the other side of town. From the shadows, I watched her meet a man I'd never seen before. He was tall, well-dressed, and far too comfortable touching her arm, leaning in close as they talked. Emily laughed, flipping her hair in that way she used to do with me. My stomach twisted. I wanted to storm in, to confront her right there, but I couldn't move. I felt paralyzed, watching my world unravel in real time. After what felt like hours, they left together. I followed them to a hotel. That night, something inside me broke. I didn't sleep. I didn't cry. I just sat there, staring at the wall, replaying every moment we'd shared and wondering how much of it had been a lie. When Emily came home the next morning, she acted like nothing had happened, but I couldn't pretend anymore. "Who is he?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. She froze. For the first time, I saw real fear in her eyes. What are you talking about? Don't lie to me, Emily. I saw you. At the bar. At the hotel. Who is he? Her face hardened. You followed me? Are you serious? Do you even hear how crazy that sounds? I can't believe this. You don't trust me at all. Trust you? How can I trust you when you're sneaking around and lying to my face? Who is he? She didn't answer. Instead, she grabbed her keys and stormed out, slamming the door behind her. I stood there numb, realizing the truth I'd been avoiding. Emily wasn't who I thought she was, and whatever this was, it wasn't love anymore. Emily didn't come home that night or the next. I called, I texted, but she didn't respond. After 2 days, I drove to Claire's house, desperate for answers. Claire opened the door, her face pale and drawn. Before I could even speak, she stepped aside and gestured for me to come in. We need to talk, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. My heart sank. Where is she? What's going on? Claire took a deep breath. There's something I need to tell you. Something I should have told you a long time ago. Emily isn't who you think she is. Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. What are you talking about? Claire handed me a photo, a wedding picture. Emily, smiling, in a white dress. Standing beside her was a man I didn't recognize. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with piercing eyes that seemed to bore into me even through the photograph. Who is this? Her husband, Claire said. His name is Daniel. He's been in prison for the past 3 years, but he's out now. And he wants her back. The room spun. Husband? Prison? What the hell are you talking about? Emily married him when she was 20. She thought he was her way out of a bad home life, but he turned out to be worse than anything she was running from. Controlling, violent, dangerous. She tried to leave him, but he wouldn't let her go. The only reason she managed to escape was because he got arrested for assault. She changed her name, moved here, and tried to start over. And you didn't think I should know this? My voice cracked. She was scared. She thought if she told you, you'd leave. And she didn't want that. She loves you. But now Daniel's out, and he's been looking for her. He found her. I couldn't breathe. My hands trembled as I gripped the photo. What does he want? Claire's eyes filled with tears. He wants her, and he'll do whatever it takes to get her. Suddenly, the pieces clicked into place. The late nights, the secretive phone calls, the fear in her eyes. Emily hadn't been cheating. She'd been running. I left Claire's house in a daze, my mind racing. When I got back to our apartment, the door was unlocked. My stomach churned as I stepped inside. Emily was there pacing, her eyes red and swollen. When she saw me, she burst into tears. I'm sorry, she sobbed. I wanted to tell you, but I didn't know how. I thought I could keep you safe, keep us safe. But he found me. He found us. I wrapped my arms around her, holding her as she shook. We'll figure this out. I won't let him hurt you. But it wasn't that simple. The next few days were a blur of fear and paranoia. Emily refused to leave the apartment, and I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. Then one night, the nightmare became real. We woke to the sound of glass shattering. Someone was inside. I jumped out of bed and grabbed the baseball bat I kept by the door. Emily was frozen, her eyes wide with terror. Stay here, I whispered. Call the police. I crept into the living room, my heart pounding. The front door hung open, the lock broken, and standing in the middle of the room was Daniel. He smiled, a slow, predatory grin. You must be the new guy. Get out, I said, my voice shaking. Daniel took a step closer. You think you can keep her from me? You think you know her? You don't know anything. Before I could react, he lunged. The bat slipped from my hands as we crashed to the floor. He was stronger, faster, and fueled by rage. But I wasn't going down without a fight. We struggled, knocking over furniture and breaking lamps. Emily screamed. and I saw her out of the corner of my eye, fumbling with her phone. I managed to land a solid punch, and Daniel staggered back. "Run!" I shouted at Emily. She hesitated for just a second before bolting out the door. Daniel roared and came at me again, but this time I was ready. I grabbed a broken lamp and smashed it against his head. He collapsed, and I didn't wait to see if he was getting back up. I ran after Emily. The police arrived minutes later. They arrested Daniel, but the damage was done. Emily was trembling, clutching my hand as we gave our statements. In the days that followed, we tried to piece our lives back together, but the scars ran deep. Emily finally filed for divorce from Daniel, cutting the last tie that bound her to him, and I stood by her, ready to face whatever came next. But I knew one thing for certain: our story was far from over. I forgave Emily. It wasn't easy, but I loved her too much to let her past destroy what we had. She promised there would be no more secrets, and I believed her. We focused on rebuilding our lives, trying to put Daniel behind us. But peace didn't last. A month later, the nightmare returned. Daniel had been released. I don't know how, but he was out, and he came back for her. Emily was terrified, and so was I. We contacted the police again, but they told us there was nothing they could do unless he violated the restraining order. Then one evening he showed up at our door. I wasn't home when it happened. I had stepped out to grab groceries, and when I returned, the street was filled with flashing lights and sirens. My stomach dropped as I ran toward the apartment. The police wouldn't let me inside. Emily was in handcuffs, her face pale and streaked with tears. She looked at me, and I could see the devastation in her eyes. "He wouldn't stop," she said, her voice trembling. I had no choice. I wanted to reach for her, to hold her, to tell her everything would be okay, but they took her away before I could say a word. The days that followed were a blur. I hired lawyers, attended hearings, and tried to make sense of what had happened. Emily told me Daniel had forced his way inside again, threatening her. She acted out of fear, out of desperation. But the law didn't see it that way. She was charged and sentenced to prison. I was in shock. I still am. I visit her as often as I can, but every time I see her behind those bars, it feels like a knife in my chest. She saved herself. She saved us. But the price she paid was unbearable. Now I'm left trying to pick up the pieces of a life that feels shattered beyond repair. I don't know what the future holds for us. All I know is that I still love her, and I'll keep fighting for her, no matter how long it takes, and because love doesn't disappear, even when everything else falls apart.